Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS Threat Analysis Rundown. My name is Katie Nichols. I am a certified instructor for Forensics 578 Cyber Threat Intelligence. Also probably relevant, another hat I wear is as the co-chair, one of 3 co-chairs for the upcoming SANS CTI Summit, which is our focus today. I can't believe it. The CTI Summit, one of my favorite events of the year, and it is next week. So today I am so excited to be joined by my co-chairs, Rebekah Brown and Rick Holland. Welcome. Excited to have you both. CTI Summit next week. So I'd love to have you start by just introducing yourselves. And I feel like we've done this for a couple of years now. How long have you been doing the summit? What are you excited about? Rebekah, I'll start with you.
So Rick can probably answer how many years we've been doing it all together, because I would say 10, but that's just a guess. It's been a long time.
I think it's 11 or 12.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, it's been great. But I'm Rebekah Brown. I'm one of the course authors for Forensics 578 Cyber Threat Intelligence, and I've been a co-chair for the summit for the past few years with Rick and Katie, and it's one of my favorite events of the year. I'm really excited to get in town and see everybody and hear some of these talks.
Rick, I think you're the oldest timer of the 3 of us.
I was just trying to see I was going to try to find it quickly. I'm not having success with it to see how many years we're at, but I think.
I know you make a new folder every year, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. I was going to look for the folder, but I'm having some technical challenges navigating.
It's been a long time to say
my finder. So I'm so excited to join y'all today, and I'll be even more excited to see you and the whole CTI community that we've kind of developed and nurtured over the past 10 plus years that it's been. But my name's Rick Holland. I presented the first event, and then I've been co-chairing for 8-7 years, something along those lines. I'm currently a CISO at ReliaQuest. ReliaQuest bought Digital Shadows, so cyber threat intelligence provider. And before that, I was a Forrester analyst. And when I first started presenting at CTI Summit, I was doing threat intel from a Forrester lens. And it's been nice to see the space evolve over the past 10 plus years.
Awesome. Well, excited to have both of you. Our goal for today is just kind of talk through some aspects of the summit that we're excited about, pointing out some talks and pointing out some concepts that might be helpful, maybe especially if you're newer to this field. It's awesome. One of the things that I'm so excited about with the summit, we will be in person in DC. That's sold out, but anyone can register for free online. So we'll drop the link in comments there for you. You can go ahead and register even now, right? It's Monday and Tuesday. You can jump in, jump out. And we know not everyone has, decade of experience in CTI. So wanted to kind of talk through some what to expect, some of the talks, the frameworks, the things to help you understand and make the most out of this. So again, summit is next week, Monday and Tuesday. And so probably a good place to start. This is an annual event, right? Online for free. We have a keynote. So I'm really excited for this keynote. Thinking about all the different aspects of CTI, we have a lot of them. And, I know one area that I'm learning more and more about is tracking, right? These mercenary groups. And we have Bill from Citizen Lab coming. So Rebekah, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, I know you were kind of the idea person behind bringing Bill in. Like, why are you excited about this keynote? Why do you think this topic's important?
Yeah, so I'm also really excited about this keynote because you're right, this area of the development of commercial spyware, mercenary spyware, and very sophisticated, some of the most sophisticated things we're seeing out there are tools that are being created by companies and marketed by companies for use. They claim that they're used for like legitimate reasons, but it is, and folks like Bill are able to see when these tools and when these capabilities are actually being used in ways that I think a lot of people would say is probably not good and something that we should put a stop to. Bill Martak, he's a senior researcher at the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto that works on the intersection of human rights and digital rights. So he does a lot of work protecting journalists and dissidents and human rights activists who end up being targeted by this really sophisticated spyware that's out on the market. So I'm excited about the talk because Bill is wonderful at not only diving into the technical details, talking about the exploits and the methods. There was a paper they put out, a few months back about network injection being used as the method of infection for one of these targeted cases. But also, as you mentioned, like, what are the political aspects? And are there things, is this something that we can solve purely with things like digital forensics, threat intelligence, or are there other tools that we need to use and learn to develop? And if so, what can CTI do to actually equip those folks to use these new tools? So I think this is an area that I'm really excited to hear more about. And I'm also excited to see, where we think that this trend of commercialized advanced capabilities will continue to evolve. We can look back 10 years ago where the field was, look at where it is now. Where's it going to go? So I'm really excited for this keynote.
Yeah, and I dropped in, if you aren't familiar with Citizen Lab's work already, definitely on my RSS feed, a really interesting org to follow their research. And I think what's interesting to me and what I think makes a good keynote is something that kind of makes you think a little bit. And whenever we talk about these, mercenary hacker for hire groups, in Forensics 578, I always tell my students, like, we can talk about what they're doing and, track their TTPs and these different organizations, but there's also an ethical aspect of this that I can't answer. We can't answer for you. And I think that's what's really interesting here, right? I think there's the aspect of, okay, if whatever country you're from, if that government was using, some of these exploits from one of these companies to do counterterrorism efforts, would you feel differently than if a different country that maybe is, not in your interests was using them to enable criminal activity? So there's a lot of ethical questions around this as well. Rick, curious your takes on the mercenary groups and actors.
Yeah, there's two. One is anything when Citizen Lab puts research out, I'm always very interested in it. And I think sometimes what you're seeing targeting there, testing to expand targeting even beyond. And one of the to me, it's like barriers of entry keep getting lower. And then you've had examples like Hacking Team as an example where their tools got leaked out. And, we've seen NSA tools and things like that. But anytime these types of, government level, well-developed resource things get leaked, it just makes our jobs as defenders that much harder. So knowing how the bad guys, in this case, are using those tools can help inform our defense.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of an interesting keynote to kick off our day on Monday. So that will definitely be one to tune into. Then wanted to highlight as we go on in the day, we have two different tracks. And our track one, awesome talks there. Luckily, everything's recorded. And so this is actually where online it's going to be pretty easy. You just click to the other track versus in person, you're going to have to walk to the next room. Whew, pretty tough. But wanted to highlight that we have a new to CTI track. We're really excited about this because I think all of us are really passionate about bringing new people into this industry. And so if you're listening and you're like, I'm a sysadmin or I'm doing real estate work and I want to get into CTI, this is probably a great track for you. We've chosen some talks that are going to give kind of background of foundational CTI concepts. So really excited about this. Becca, Rick, any thoughts on kind of why it's so important to have a new to CTI track or, recommendations for anyone who's maybe newer listening today?
Yeah, I'm really excited that we have it, especially because I know we'll have such a large audience joining us online. And what's so great about the online availability and the fact that it's free is that you can have people who maybe they just couldn't travel, or maybe they tried to register too late and it's all full. But I think we also, if past years kind of repeat themselves, we have a lot of folks who are thinking about like, hey, I currently do this type of job, but I'm really interested in CTI and what is it like, and would it be a good fit for me, and should I, pursue this as, a pivot in my my career path, or I'm thinking even students. I think we have quite a few student groups who will be joining in, and some joining us in person, which is fantastic. But the opportunity to learn a little bit more from kind of an introductory level, or this is my first year on the team, or I was told I'm doing CTI now and I have no background. I think it's just fantastic that we have this dedicated track that can really help people who are exploring or new or recently transitioned into CTI.
The one thing that I think about is, like, from an Intel production perspective, you always want to have your products tailored to your audience. Having this track lets us kind of tailor things out. So we'll still have content for more experienced people, as Becca kind of alluded to. But now we have something that's going to be tightened. I mean, it's a good lesson for Intel products or anyone that's new and thinking about it, right? Whatever you're producing, being tactical, strategic, operational, needs to resonate with that audience and to be at the right level for them. So I really think it helps us address two different sides of the CTI community.
It's elegant, Rick. You're talking about the different tracks and a foundational concept in CTI of tailoring to your consumers. That's actually going to be a talk in that new to CTI track. Brett, and I'm actually mentoring and looking at his slides, talking about connecting CTI to decision makers. So that's going to be a really good foundational talk there. Another one to highlight, the MITRE Ingenuity team is going to come and talk about their project, CTI Blueprints, which you also mentioned reporting. So this is kind of a cool one, especially if you're trying to figure out, how do I write reports? You can check this out, but Ross from MITRE is going to be talking about this. There are certain types of general reports that analysts write about campaigns, threat actors, and intrusion. And what this project does is gives you a template for that. You always need to tailor things to your consumers, decision makers, right? As others will talk about, like Brett, but kind of nice to start somewhere, especially if you've never written a report like this before. So that'll be just one of the many talks in that new to CTI track. Excited about that. All right, let's see what else we have in this track. One of the things, this is in person only, but I will share a couple of resources here. In the afternoon, John Doyle, who's another instructor for Forensics 578, Stephen and Michael are going to be talking about building a CTI program. What we're going to do is going to be in person only. So if you're not in person, you don't get the live workshop, but what we're going to do is share out some resources. So one of those to highlight, and this is something that John actually wrote that maybe you'd find useful if you're trying to build a team or hire in others. This is talking about core competencies for a CTI analyst. This also could be really useful if you are newer to CTI and you're trying to figure out, what are the things that I should be focusing on? This also could be a framework for you to think about different things you're learning at the summit. So Becca, Rick, I'm curious, looking at this, especially people who are newer, trying to maybe build their CTI careers out, are there certain aspects of this that you think are maybe most important, or that you would encourage folks to kind of look out for throughout the summit?
I'll start off with just one thing. I don't know Stephen, but I know John and Debo. They've put out a lot of great content for the community in general. So I'm excited about this workshop. For those that are in person, I think is going to be a really, really good one. I think it's tough to choose. I mean, I do like the problem solving and professional effectiveness, because if you can't do those correct, it doesn't matter what your products are, you're going to have challenge with them. If they're technical, I don't know, it's tough to choose. All four of those there could be significant. The one thing I would say is cyber threat proficiency. I think we have some of the best CTI analysts that don't come from the cyber space at all. And we always talk about fundamentals of threat intel, and we want to avoid things like groupthink, and we want to have diverse teams. So actually, I think bringing in people that maybe don't have the same level of cyber threat proficiency, but have language skills or geopolitical skills, is a really important component to building out teams.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, again, they're all important. And I think that actually one thing to be mindful of is that we tend to gravitate towards the things that we are already good at or most interested at. So I see a lot of folks who are like, technical literacy, cyber threat proficiency, like that is what I love. I'm going to go to all those talks. I'm going to take the best notes. Whereas if maybe problem solving or professional effectiveness are not the things you would naturally kind of gravitate towards, maybe that means there's a lot you can learn there. So actually, like, take a look at these, think about what is your absolute favorite, and then like seek out talks on the other ones. Maybe help round things out
Yeah,
there.
do a gap analysis on yourself.
Nice. Applying structured techniques to your own attendance at talks. I like it. Yeah, I always go back to the communication. Like they're all important, but I don't know. I found time and time again that just being able to communicate, to write, to speak, to tailor to your decision makers is really key. And one thing, that I always like to do at conferences, I don't know if this is really nerdy because I'm interested in public speaking, but I always like to observe like the presentations that I was like, that was a great presentation. What did they do? What did that speaker do? Or how did they communicate? And so for me, I don't know, again, very nerdy conference attendee thing. Like I like to think about the content, but also how it's presented and then start to like take notes about like, oh, I should totally use that technique for myself as I'm communicating or presenting. So just another nerdy thing if you like to think about how people are speaking and talking. So excited for that workshop. Also, if you're in person, another workshop we should highlight, Taz, who's our one of the authors for SANS, is going to be doing a Linux workshop. So I believe that's on day 2. So if you're in person, it's another fun one. But lots of other content that is going to be online as well. Wanted to talk a little bit and get some thoughts on ransomware. So Morgan from Sophos is going to be talking about the ransomware as a service, RAAS ecosystem. And one thing I should say is, sometimes we have a lot of abbreviations we use in this field. This is where, especially if you're newer, if you don't know, one of the nice things that we have during the CTI Summit, once you register, you're going to get invited to a Slack. I believe there's actually a new to CTI channel, but there are channels for each of these talks where people are going to be discussing. If you have a question, that is a great place to ask. There are going to be all kinds of people from different backgrounds, a lot of experienced CTI folks. If you ever are like, I have no idea what RAAS means, don't hesitate to ask a question. So ransomware as a service, I really like, talks that have case studies. So that was, as this abstract came in, right, we're going to get case studies of 2 different activity clusters, ransomware affiliates. So really excited about this one. One other ransomware related thing I should mention, there's an awesome class from our friend Ryan Chapman, Forensics 528. And if you sign up for the summit, you're actually going to get a copy of this poster. I can't share it now. They said I can share a sneak preview, but not the whole thing. But just a sneak preview of this, right, relating to Morgan's talk about this RAAS, ransomware as a service model. I thought this was kind of a nice breakdown in this poster talking about terms you're probably going to hear during that talk: initial access broker, right? Then passing off access to the ransomware affiliate. And then ultimately, right, the ransomware operator, then getting to the negotiation side. So just a sneak preview. If you sign up for the summit, this poster is going to be available. I think they're going to be hard copies if you like to put posters on your wall like I do. So Becca, Rick, wanted to get your thoughts a little bit. Any thoughts about the ransomware ecosystem? Anything you're tracking recently there? I would just say that, yeah, the ransomware as a service model, I think, is worth paying attention to. And I think one thing to listen for in this talk is that some of the challenges of just tracking the different stages of these compromises, right? My team sees a lot of the initial access activity, and then trying to track when does it get passed off is tough. So Rick, your thoughts on this?
I have one thought on ransomware in general. I know people can be over ransomware. My joke line is like, you may be over ransomware, but ransomware is not over you. A lot of times people think ransomware is old news. It's been in our threat model forever. I mean, I would contend that for most organizations, the top thing on their threat model should be opportunistic ransomware. If you can't deal with opportunistic ransomware, where the initial access brokers are going after unpatched external facing services, no multi-factor authentication on external services, you're going to have big problems. So that's one, is as you're looking at talks, ransomware is still really relevant, even though a lot of people are kind of annoyed with it and want to deal with something else. It is definitely still the threat du jour that's out there. The other observation actually kind of ties back to my comment about hacking team and tools. Ransomware as a service, and part of why I would say it should be at the top of people's threat models, it's the barrier to entry, right? It's the barrier to entry for the criminals. And you have some that are more closed and they don't have affiliates and they do all that types of things. But to get started in a ransomware crew or whatever, it's not a lot of work because it's so specialized like this. So it just makes defenders' jobs that much harder. So I think the ransomware stuff's really important, despite us kind of having it be bottom of the fold news, right? Because everybody's getting ransomed, and now the SEC Form 8Ks that are getting filed on Friday afternoons have new ransomware disclosures. So it's still really important, and don't take your eyes off the ball.
That's great advice. Yeah, absolutely. Becca, your thoughts?
No, the same thing. Like, just because we think something is no longer technically interesting to us, if you think back to those core competencies, that doesn't mean it isn't impactful and isn't worth putting in a lot of time and effort and making sure that you are protected as best you can be. And again, just the professionalization of these types of attacks, I think is going to be a really interesting area to study. And I know we have, I don't think we have any talks specifically on it this time, but we've had folks in the past who've talked about it, and probably people in attendance who study this and look at how did the essentially the economy move from, when we first started seeing ransomware being leveraged, to we have now a poster with a business model that involves things like negotiations and people who specialize in all these different things. I think that's a model we should keep an eye on for other areas as well, because this is clearly successful. It's clearly working. We on the defense side are still working to keep up with it, and other criminals, other types of activities are taking note of the new successful model. So it's probably something we should be thinking about in other areas in addition to ransomware.
I just dropped a link to share out. Last fall, the NCSC and the NCA, so UK law enforcement, released a really nice cybercrime ecosystem, and it breaks out the different model, the silos here. And just to build on Becca's comment on like specialization, you see that in other areas as well, business email compromise being one as well. So Becca, I think is a great point that, like, let's apply this model to other types of attacks that people are doing.
I think it's a great point. Another ransomware talk. Yes, because it is still affecting so many organizations. It is kind of sad that it's gotten, below the fold status almost. But I think it's, in contrasting different talks, right? Kicking off Bill's keynote, talking about mercenary groups, and some of those exploits might not affect a ton of victims versus, still important to think about, versus ransomware as a service. I have to give a shout out to one of our comments, Elijah, making a pretty awesome dad joke. Imagine a pie that would give you a ransomware as a service. Is it a Raspberry Pi? I like that. If you came up with that one, I'm very impressed on the fly. So ransomware as a service, RAAS, pretty important topic to still focus on.
And, Katie, your discussion early on about acronyms and RAS, and also the amazing puns that we can come up with. I've decided to launch a new competition for attendees. I will figure out some sort of a prize. I just thought of this 5 minutes ago, so that's still TBD.
Like
but I think rather than waiting for folks who are maybe newer to the industry or aren't sure if something is an acronym to ask, if you are listening to a talk or watching a talk and you hear something that is an industry term or an acronym or can be used in multiple different ways, go ahead and throw that term and definition into Slack. And whoever is our top contributor will get the TBD, but definitely will be awesome prize.
I love that, right? Proactively. I know, because we all do it, right? We all kind of use the acronym and just assume people know. Everyone knows different things. And so helping each other out by spelling things out, I like it. That's a great challenge. So we'll keep an eye out and we'll reiterate that. We'll figure out a fabulous prize, I'm sure. All right, let's talk about some other talks here. We had to have an AI talk, and this one I'm really excited about. You might be familiar with these names. Thomas, I know he makes these awesome graphics on Twitter. I'll try to drop a link into his Twitter. And he actually has a really cool book visualizing, different aspects of cyber threat intel and cyber security overall. And then Roberto, who's at Microsoft, he's been kind of a long time friend of SANS Summit's, amazing speaker. They're going to talk about AI, specifically large language models. And so at the, I don't know, at the risk of ranting a little bit, Becca, Rick, what are your thoughts? Why do you think it's important for us as CTI analysts, the community, to look at AI? If you have any AI rants or hot takes, I'll accept those as well, because I certainly do.
I will just be honest. I was an AI and like LLM holdout because I think it's been in the works for a long time, but it seemed like there was a specific point where all of a sudden everyone was starting to talk about it. It was probably ChatGPT's first release. And I immediately thought like, this has got to be a buzzword. This has got to be a fad. It's not going to actually be helpful. We're all just wasting our time. But no, I was definitely wrong. There are a lot of ways to effectively leverage AI and LLM to do a lot of different things. Everything from like when I'm trying to find replacements and like cooking recipes, I just asked ChatGPT. My husband uses it to come up with bedtime story ideas for our 5-year-old. So it is just useful across the board. So I'm actually really looking forward to hearing more and hearing a different perspective, especially since my perspective has changed so much over the past few months.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, an RSA conference is coming up, and we know we're going to get AI'd to death there. But just because something is a buzzword doesn't mean it doesn't have value. So I'm excited about this talk and want to pay close attention to it. There's 2 angles on AI that I think about, or 3. One is this AI versus AI cyber battle kind of whatever. That's not where we are today, right? Criminals are using AI as their own co-pilots. They have fraud GPT. They have some unlocked LLMs that they can use. So seeing how the threat actors are using for their activities, just like a co-pilot we would use on the vendor side, I think is an interesting thing to track. And again, here's a third time I'm going to mention lowering the barrier to entry and making the attackers' lives easier. And that, I think, is probably the main use case from a criminal adversary perspective. Nation states, whole nother game. The things that the NSA, the things that Russia, China are doing with AI from an offensive cyber perspective is a very different ballgame. On the defender, on the CTI front, being able to have the concept of like threat intel reporting on demand, right? I want to know about threats to financial services in Europe for 2023, and then being able to having agents go out and bring out public stuff, bringing in your internal data and generating some reports. I think that's a cool application, and I look forward to seeing how that evolves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because, Becca, I was probably a little bit of an AI skeptic early on as well. And one of the things to what Rick was saying that sort of shifted my mindset, I think it was Vasuja Call when Microsoft was making a big AI announcement at RSA, right? She pointed out exactly what you said of this lowers the barrier for entry for defenders, right? People who are just learning, or, hey, like, how do I write a PowerShell script to do this? Right? AI can make that a little bit easier. So I was like, all right, I'm all for bringing in new people, lowering barriers to entry. The thing that bothers me about AI is the fear, uncertainty, and doubt hype over adversaries are using AI to find new 0 days and new techniques. And maybe, but I haven't seen a ton of evidence there. And my feeling is adversaries are doing just fine without using AI to find new 0 days. So I'm a little bit skeptical there, but I think the power of it really relies, right? It comes in what it can do for defenders and analysts. So excited for this talk. One of the terms you'll hear that I'm learning a lot more about from my colleague, Jimmy, prompt engineering. And this is such an interesting concept of like, we as the humans have to figure out how to tell the AI to give it what we want. And this is something that I think CTI analysts can be really, really good at as we're trying to tailor our own products or our own questions, right? And I think that's something that I'm really interested in learning more about. And I've heard that if you threaten the AI, your ChatGPT, and say you're going to get fired if you don't give a good answer, sometimes it'll give you better answers, which is kind of mean. Maybe you could be a little nicer and offer a prize, but I digress. So really excited for that talk. AI, again, one of those things, whether you're a skeptic or fully embracing, I don't think it's going to go away. So good to kind of get familiar with those concepts. So that's going to almost certainly be one that I think we're going to have to go back and watch a few times because I think it's going to be pretty dense. Let's see, what other talks do we have? This is one that I'm excited about in the new to CTI track. And I think this is a great example of how sometimes we talk about, hey, if you're interested in speaking, get out there. And a lot of people are like, I don't have anything to share, right? I'm newer, I'm not an expert. Well, this was such a cool abstract. And we were like, we have to accept Chandler as a student, right? He has this awesome cyber hobbit theme, but talking about, right, embarking in the journey of CTI and, right, his perspective on that. So this is a great example of how even if you're newer to the field, like you have something to share too. And if you're newer, I think this would be a great talk to kind of hear about Chandler's experience and then, also get some good Hobbit metaphors, hopefully there. So just another one to keep an eye out for. All right. So other things I wanted to highlight, we were kind of explicit about bringing in some cloud talks. Again, cloud, I don't know, different reactions that might be elicited there. And I'll ask Rebekah and Rick, your thoughts about CTI in the cloud, how it's different. But one of the things, I've noticed is that it's a lot tougher to find threat reporting about what cloud actors are doing. So Cato Security, bringing in Matt from Cato, I think they just put out like a new blog post today. But talking about malware in the cloud, how it's a little bit different. So we have a couple of cloud talks. I also wanted to mention while we're on the subject of cloud, really cool resource that one of our previous stream guests, Amitai and his team just released. If you are looking for information about cloud threat incidents, check out this incident resource from Wiz. It was just released yesterday.
Oh yeah, I saw this. Yeah, I'm very interested. It looks like a cool resource.
Yeah. So curious what your thoughts are. Rick, have you noticed the same thing with reporting? What do you think are the challenges in the cloud landscape for CTI analysts?
Well, one of the things that I liked about Matt's talk, and he's coming over from Glasgow, Scotland. So he's traveling across the pond for it. And one of the reasons it appealed to me when we saw the CTF on it is I think, again, people kind of roll their eyes and be like, oh, cryptojacking, that's all that's happening in the cloud. And I think with Intel, like we need to be challenging assumptions. We need to be poking at things and like, is this normal? Is this everything that's going on? So to me, this was quite interesting to see us getting beyond kind of the default thing. Oh, it's just cryptojacking, whatever. It's not that interesting. So Matt's going to dig into interesting things here. So again, it's like changing our perception of what people assume the status quo of cloud-based attacks are.
Again, with this theme of kind of different types of threats, right? The mercenary groups, ransomware, cryptojacking. I agree. This is one where I sometimes see organizations say like, oh, I don't care. There's a crypto miner on my machine. Like, you might, right? Like it's a sign that someone's in there and they shouldn't be. So easy to overlook that. But yeah, it's interesting. I found I have to challenge myself. I'm more used to traditional endpoint and network collection sources as an analyst, trying to be explicit about learning how are these TTPs different in the cloud. So Rebekah, your thoughts on the cloud threat landscape?
No, just exactly there that I think it would be easier for everyone if we could just take our exact same methodologies and all the knowledge we've learned from kind of more traditional network threat intelligence and be able to apply it to the cloud, but that's not the case. Like it's absolutely different. There's a lot more, I don't want to say noise, although we do have a talk about how to not drown in the noise of the cloud, which I'm actually very excited about. But there's just different techniques. And again, we can run into some of those, the logical fallacies of, oh, we see this. And when I'm looking at my enterprise network, if I see this, it means this. But in a cloud environment, it could mean something completely different. So picking up on not only what are the unique TTPs, but when are kind of the same types of indicators, when do they mean different things based on the environment?
I like it. And you hit on a few things there, right? Mentioning another one of our cloud talks from UOTAM, the challenge of, right, the noise in the cloud. And this is something as I've started looking at different cloud log types, I'm like, I can't pick out the signal from the noise here. So that'll be a good one. Becca, you also mentioned a key word, I think, fallacies, or maybe you mentioned a bias. And we haven't talked about this yet. It's been 36 minutes. This is something that's going to come up quite a bit. So Becca, I'll let you do the honors. For anyone who's not familiar, what is a cognitive bias? What is a fallacy? Why do we talk about these so much every year?
So these are all things that, and especially in the cyber threat intelligence field, a lot of the work we do involves making analytic judgments and coming to conclusions about pieces of data or things that we're finding, whether we're doing an investigation or we're doing research. But that judgment part, it is very easy for it to be influenced. Even if we think like, oh no, I'm approaching this from a purely unbiased, logical perspective. I'm the Spock of CTI. You have these. Everyone has just unconscious biases, ways you view the world, things you've seen, the way you think about things. I kind of talked about that. If you've done a lot of incident response in a corporate environment, that is the way you just think about attacks that way. And those become your biases. And what I love about this talk that we have, and again, I could talk about biases all day. I love when people can kind of own their biases, or if you're having a group brainstorming session with your CTI team and you say like, hey, I'm biased because when I see cryptojacking, I immediately assume low sophistication and like call me out if that's impacting the analysis. I love when we do that. But Andy's talk is actually, we're not just going to talk about biases, but we're going to talk about the biases we have about our biases, which I think is going to be really interesting, but just so important to like our overall ability as analysts to come to sound analytic judgments.
Yeah, it's very meta, right? Talking about biases, about our fallacies, and yeah, mind explosion. Rick, why do you think this is something that, even if we've heard it before, worth coming back to every year?
Well, we should always check our biases. So they're in and of itself. And I like this talk. I've been working with Andy on his slides, and he's got one area that I particularly like around derivative reporting. And that may be a term that a lot of people aren't familiar with, but it's when you take one Intel product and you put that into something else, and then you communicate it out. And he's got some examples around ransomware where people will take derivative reporting that is saying, this sector is the top sector being targeted, but there's collection bias there. You don't understand fully what that Intel provider did, and then you're taking it and perhaps even fitting it to the narrative that you want. So I think this will be a good one to kind of challenge our thoughts, especially around reporting from vendors, typically vendors or government agencies, and how we leverage those in subsequent things that we communicate into our own organization.
Yeah, Andy's take is going to be really unique, and I'm excited for that. Comment mentioned a book, The Critical Thinking Effect, is something for more reading. There's so many resources that you can look to find more about these. This is one that I like, and it's on my wall, the Cognitive Bias Codex. So I'll drop a link into this one. I think this is a favorite topic for kind of all of us. So not mad that it keeps coming up year after year, because we all have to keep checking those, right? So excited for that talk as well. So full day one, lots and lots of talks. Let's talk a little bit about some of the day two talks. We're going to be kicking off with actually a summary just from all of us. Kind of hopefully get some interaction from in-person online attendees summarizing, because what you'll find is there's so much information, and trying to keep track of all the references and things that I want to follow up on. Rick just shared a structured analytic techniques book link. How do I track that? So we'll try to wrap that up for you in the morning of day two. Excited for Gert Jan's talk. He is kind of a veteran speaker. He's also on our advisory board. Cooking a high-performing team. So I'm excited for the slow cooking metaphor here. I'm a fan of the slow cooker, set it and forget it. But if anyone, is looking to how do you build a better team? And I would say, even if you're not building a cyber threat intelligence team, applicability to different types of teams. And Gert Jan's always just a great speaker. So that'll be a fun one to kick off with. And then I swear we did not do this on purpose. We have two speakers from the MITRE ATT&CK team back.
Yeah, right. That's true.
In our defense, when we accepted Joe Slowick, he was not part of the MITRE ATT&CK team. So he's their new CTI lead, which I know because that was my old role. So we have two back-to-back MITRE ATT&CK talks, or talks from the MITRE ATT&CK team. First one, Jamie, on MITRE ATT&CK mappings and the so what. And we have had so many MITRE ATT&CK talks across the years. This one's a little bit different, which I'm excited about. Like Jamie's asking the question, okay, yep, MITRE ATT&CK, hot trend, we all use it. What value does using MITRE ATT&CK actually add? I'm curious, Becca, Rick, your thoughts on, ATT&CK, which is one of our frameworks that we often talk about. I'll drop a link to it. What are some of the kind of issues you've seen with this in the past, or, pain points that teams have had?
One pain point I saw from early on was, I think, the assumption that some of the analysts I worked with, that like, if they could just memorize everything, like every tactic and every technique that's laid out, that they would be a better analyst. And so kind of the emphasis was on that like memorization aspect. And, it is absolutely great to go through and learn more about different things that different attackers are doing. But I don't think that is how it was meant to be utilized. And I'm glad to see people moving away from it. And one thing I've actually become really excited about is the ways that it's grown over time. I'm really excited about the pre-attack and kind of better understanding some of the precursors and some of the requirements that an adversary has to achieve in order to even begin to carry out an attack. So I'm really excited for this talk to kind of hear about like use cases that are actually effective, rather than, I think, like I said, some of the ways that I think people initially thought they might want to approach it.
I'm gonna build on my comment about Andy's talk in derivative reporting. MITRE ATT&CK mappings and your controls as they map to the TTPs, vendors will have different graphs that show that mapping, and that often makes it into derivative report. So the example here would be, I'm the head of security operations, I'm the CISO, and I want to show coverage up the chain of command. And so I'm going to map it out, and I have all this great coverage for the initial access tactics and techniques that are out there, but it can give a false sense of security. If you're showing the spider graph that is well populated and you have an intrusion, like, hey, Miss CISO, Mr. CISO, you said we were covered against initial access, but somehow an initial access broker gained access, et cetera. So I think you have to be careful in how you use it and the expectations that you set, because you don't want it to be like, yeah, we got it covered. We have all the techniques mapped. Well, those are the known techniques perhaps that an actor was using. Maybe there's something brand new and interesting. So I'm kind of curious when Jamie talks about some of the ways we're doing it wrong so that we can learn to do it better, because I think there's value there, but we just have to be careful how we communicate with it.
Yeah, I think it's always good to think about, why are we using a certain framework, or why are we doing this thing we're doing, right? Talking about, okay, right, we're trying to enable our audience to consume, contextualize, action findings, do something. But yeah, I think being reflective about when are we doing things that have diminishing returns, that are a distraction. To Rick's point, if you just have your bingo card, a lot of people say that with attack, and like, oh, we're all covered. And like, is that a distraction from focusing on more important things? So that'll be a great one. And if you're newer to the field, definitely check out that MITRE ATT&CK, one of the frameworks you're almost certainly going to hear. I bet you'll hear it in a lot of case study talks as well, talking about different adversary behaviors and techniques and procedures. TTP is another one, tactics, techniques, and procedures. Caught myself. That's a tough one.
I mean, I think I just said it too.
The Slack to get credit for that, though, Katie.
I'll work on that to receive the mystery prize. And then the next talk after Jamie, Joe Slowick, who's a veteran speaker at the summit. His talks are always action-packed. And this is actually an appropriate one to have right after the MITRE ATT&CK talk, because attack tends to focus more on kind of those behaviors, those tactics, techniques, and procedures. Joe's going to talk about indicators or indicators of compromise. And Rick, I think it was you who gave me the term indicators of exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
Was that Was that
Yeah,
you?
that was a CTI Summit talk probably like 7 or 8 years ago, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
And
So
actually, and I'm excited about this one after our bias conversation because we're revisiting the indicator because like we talked about indicators of exhaustion and like when Scott Roberts and I were updating our book Intelligence Driven Incident Response from version 1 to version 2, we looked back and we were like, wow, we were kind of jerks about like indicators. I mean, I feel like they were probably used in ways that weren't really effective in early days, but that doesn't mean that like the concept of indicators is useless. And so I think this is one of those things that especially folks who are, we've been around, we were there for that indicators of exhaustion talk. This will be really good for us because that is, I think, absolutely a bias. And I think that's another logical fallacy that if it is possible to misuse indicators of compromise in a way that makes investigations less effective, that they are bad, whereas it's really maybe the way they were used rather than the fact that they exist. And yeah, so that's I'm excited to actually hear and see this research that he's done.
Joe's always great because he challenges conventional thinking on all kinds of topics and things along those lines. And again, the theme from our conversation today is we should be challenging our thinking, challenging the status quo, not just as intel analysts, but just defenders in general. So I'm excited for this talk as well, because I've definitely done my fair share of poo-pooing on indicators of exhaustion.
yeah. And I think it's interesting, even just the definition, the concept. What do we mean by that? There are so many different definitions. And so I think that'll be a really interesting one. And wanted to mention on the topic of frameworks, right? MITRE ATT&CK, you're going to hear about another kind of model or framework, which we love these in cyber threat intelligence. You're probably going to hear about is this one. We confirmed it's in Joe's talk, the Pyramid of Pain from David Bianco, right? And this is where a lot of people, I find myself, when I say indicator of compromise, I mean things towards the bottom of this pyramid that are less painful for adversaries to change versus, right, MITRE ATT&CK kind of getting at the top, that tactics, techniques, and procedures level. So this is another kind of framework that I think Brett on day one in the new to CTI track has the Pyramid of Pain as well. But this is another good kind of model and framework that you might hear about. So just wanted to introduce it in case you haven't seen that one before. It at most cybersecurity conferences, I would argue it makes an appearance.
One thing I'd quickly add just on top of it is when David did this, MITRE ATT&CK wasn't where it is, right? And so TTPs was very undefined, across the industry. So one thing, we're talking about challenges of MITRE ATT&CK, but one thing that MITRE ATT&CK really did was flesh out that top section where it's tough, and it's still tough for defenders to monitor for TTPs. That the pain in the pyramid works both ways towards attackers and defenders.
Yep, absolutely. And just to kind of prepare you all, right? We mentioned MITRE ATT&CK, the kill or the Pyramid of Pain. Other frameworks you're probably going to hear about some version of a kill chain or intrusion chain. The diamond model. So you might hear about that one as well, 4 parts to any intrusion. There was one that last year made an appearance, the Varus framework. And that's another one out of Verizon. They use that to organize their data breach investigations reports. So just something to keep an eye out for, mentions these different frameworks. Again, if you're not familiar, you're like, what is this? Ask, Google it, check out those different frameworks. You'll hear these a lot because we like to use them to organize what we know. And I think you'll see that, especially with MITRE ATT&CK and a lot of the case studies, organizing those techniques and procedures. So some strong talks. Day 2, another great one from Lincoln, geopolitical risk, right? That's another topic that, it's helpful to think about at those different levels. Rick mentioned them towards the beginning, but another concept you're going to hear about, strategic, operational, and tactical. And there's a lot of overlap between these levels, but this kind of refers to often the audience, the consumers, right? Geopolitics, often more at the strategic level, but not always. Also excited, we have a couple of case studies. I mentioned this is one of my favorite types of talk is deep diving into intrusions. So we have Martin from Bitdefender. I've looked at his slides. He's going to be talking about a supply chain compromise. Everyone loves their supply chain compromises and how the adversaries used some tactics, techniques, and procedures that are still applicable for looking at other intrusions. And then really excited, we have a speaker from the Dominican Republic National CERT coming in and talking about how they responded to a state-sponsored attack. So very excited. I love hearing the in the trenches stories. So a lot of great content on day 2 as well. One thing just wanted to also mention, sharing talk. So excited for this talk from Grace. She actually went out and did a survey of a whole bunch of CTI professionals about information sharing. And she's going to share those results on networking, sharing. Becca, Rick, why do you think sharing and networking is an important topic for us to have here at the summit? How have you found that to be important for CTI teams and functions?
Well, selfishly, for people, the networking component is probably how you're going to get your next job. So I think that's a really, really key component. One thing I like about this is Grace did the V1 of this talk. Was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago? I can't recall. So I suspect there'll be some data points that she's able to diff and how things have evolved that's out there. I think on the sharing front, I still think we're challenged with sharing things at scale and indicators, and maybe that's part of why we need to rethink indicators, to Joe's point. But I do think having relationships with your peers in other companies or your competitors, right? They have a similar threat model to you. So sharing, I think the more interesting things to share is like, how do we detect this particular adversary's TTP? Or what was the after action review that we can share after an intrusion or an incident with our peers here? But, I think one of the biggest benefits of the conference in general for those that are attending in person is like the hallway con. And that's a component of this, right? You're going to build out your network. You're going to have phone a friend people that when you need some help on a new tool or an actor that you'll have a relationship with to build upon.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. Building out the trust relationships as well helps with sharing. I honestly, and maybe Joe will have more to tell us about this, but I'm wondering if maybe the reason that there was so much just sharing of indicators and the way we originally saw it, where it's like, I'm just going to throw a list of IPs over the fence and give it to you, and I've shared, because it's relatively low risk. You don't know what happened at the company. You don't know what assets they lost or what was compromised. And it feels a little safer to say like, oh, I did something good. I shared about a threat, but you haven't really given them something that's going to actually help the other organization maybe be more resilient. And that's because it comes with trust. There's a level of risk in sharing that type of information about something you've experienced, in a transparent way. And so building those trust networks are really important. Maintaining them, not losing the trust, is also really important. And we learned, during COVID, that it's absolutely possible to build and maintain and foster relationships like that digitally. But if you're able to come in person, it's also a really great way to help maybe establish and strengthen some of those relationships that down the road can lead to some of this really impactful information sharing.
Luckily, even if you're online, as we mentioned, we're going to have a Slack, which is a great way. We always see, people, even if you're just in there asking questions, right? It's a great way to connect with people, right? And maybe make a new friend or a sharing partner in the CTI Summit Slack. All right. Well, that's towards the end of our agenda here. Rebekah, excited for your evening fireside chat with Robert M. Lee, who's your co-author for Forensics 578. That's going to be in person only, but yes, I'm excited for that.
Let me tell you, I have been practicing my sitting by a fire, thinking about threat intelligence. It's been snowy in the mountains up here, so I am so dedicated to this that every Sunday I go up to the ski lodge. I don't ski. I sit by the fire and practice for this event. So this is, I'm going to nail it. It's going to be great.
We drink hot cocoa as well. I think that's
absolutely.
An important part.
That's a key part.
There you go. And while we're on this part of the page, we should say a huge thank you to our advisory board. These folks chose all these amazing talks. Some of them are going to be speaking themselves, like Sierra. So really, really excited. Again, this is next Monday and Tuesday. I can't believe it's here already. We'll drop the link in as well. Again, you can still sign up online. Going to be packed, multiple tracks on day one. Plenty of opportunities to network, ask questions, especially when you don't understand acronyms. Becca, Rick, last thoughts? Anything else you wanted to call out that you're excited about, or words of wisdom as people go into the summit?
I'd just say network, either virtually or in person. The relationships actually the three of us have through this summit has been great. And, those relationships exist with tons of people in the community. It's a really great community. So if you're new to it, don't be afraid to say hello. Come up and say hello to us. We can introduce you to people. Same thing, and that applies virtually as well. So, I would just, work on building Grace's talk out, right? What kind of CTI networking can you accomplish on Monday and Tuesday?
Yeah, and definitely use the Slack, both in person and online. Like the in-person folks, we use the Slack quite a lot. It's a great way to build community. It's a great way to ask questions. There's a really good opportunity to ask questions, follow-up questions from the speakers, because we're not limited by the however much time we have for Q&A. You can actually drop your questions, and they can answer it asynchronously. So absolutely take advantage of that. If you're there in person, and probably at home as well, make sure that you're drinking a glass of water for every glass of coffee you drink, or else probably like real hyped up by the end of the conference. But I'm really looking forward to it. It's always great to be able to get together, whether in person or virtually.
Awesome. Hydrate. Good life advice during conferences and otherwise. So Rebekah Brown, Rick Holland, thank you so much for joining us today. For you all online, thank you for joining us for this live stream. If you can join us next week, we'd love to see you virtually or in person at the SANS CTI Summit. If not, hope to see you in a future edition of the STAR live stream. That's all we have for today. Take care, everyone. See you later.
Bye-bye.